Hi, this is Bob Murphy, and you're listening to the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Welcome to the show that gets Christians thinking about faith and politics. Get ready to challenge the status quo, expand your imagination, and tackle controversy head on. Let's stand together at the intersection of faith and freedom. It's time for the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Welcome to the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm Nick Gosling, and today we're joined by Raeford Davis. Raeford has a bachelor's in criminal justice, is a former member of the United States Coast Guard, and was a police officer in the city of North Charleston for 6 years, including 4 years on patrol and 2 years as a detective. He was injured and retired in 2007, and since that time, he has become a fierce critic of the war on drugs, and that's what he's here to talk to us about today. Raeford is also an affiliate of Law Enforcement Action Partnership, formerly known as Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Raeford, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on and giving me an opportunity to speak about some important issues.
So I've seen you put out a lot of really interesting content. You're very active on social media. We've had a number of people who listen to this show who have asked us to bring you on, so it's great to have you here. So if you can just tell us a little bit about your background, what made you get into law enforcement in the first place, and kind of what was your thought process, what was your attitude towards the drug war and law enforcement in general, and then kind of take us through how your thinking changed there over time.
Right. Well, I grew up Southern Baptist, not a big church goer, but I went to church and certainly big into Christianity. Kind of moved over to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and really enjoyed that there. Considered myself a compassionate conservative. And I wanted to, get out there and help my community and make a difference. And I was a little bit older, so I was like, I was 29 years old when I started, so I was a little bit older, married, had kids. I figured I had good judgment. I had a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Charleston Southern University. That used to be called the Baptist College. Who else to do that than me, to go out there and serve my community? And that's the attitude of pretty much all officers to go out there. It's not these bad guys or guys that really want to impose their will on others. They really want to make a difference. And and so that's what we did. North Charleston, city of about 80,000, kind of the working class side of the more historic, touristy, Charleston, about half black, half white. And we had a lot of crime. When I was there, we were considered the 8th most dangerous city in the nation, and very active. And so as a patrol officer, 4 years on patrol, our main mission was get, guns and drugs off the street, because guns and drugs are bad and you have lots of crime. And a lot of it revolves around that. So you get out there, be very proactive, and try to make a difference. And I saw very quickly that what we were doing wasn't working. I could stand in one particular neighborhood I worked in was called Four Way, because it was a four-way stop, and is known for drug activity and had been for years. And I could stand right on the street corner. I stand on the street corner, patrol car, get out of it, full, arms folded, daring, the street level drug dealers, daring them to continue the activities. And what would they do? They would move over 2 streets right around the corner and continue as normal. And that's just one little thing, just to show that you could affect it and move it around or push it around, but that was about it. And and then you look at the cost and started to see that really in a lot of ways how we would kind of treat people in the community. We looked like a vicious gang going around pulling people over for tail lights out or not using their turn signal long enough and trying to build it into a search so we could look for guns or drugs, and it was just really kind of felt distasteful, even with people that were guilty. It just didn't quite feel right, and I felt that, and just you got more and more into just seeing how we really violated people's personal liberties, and even for the substances that generally people mind altering substances that people generally consider unhealthy or bad. These are adults with consensual adult activity, and they're using their own bodies to choose to consume whatever they wish or trade. And we were using, as a police officer, we were using violence or the threat of violence to stop them. And, at a fundamental level, that's not right. And that weighed on me quite a bit. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. So somebody might, push back and say, well, okay, it's one thing if somebody is using drugs and they're an adult and it's consensual, even though most people who are pro-drug war, of course, wouldn't even say that. But let's say somebody does say that, but they go, what about when they're going in and they're dealing near the schools or near the churches and basically bringing more crime into the community? How would you respond to that argument?
Well, that's what I would say is this stuff's real crime. And we had the people in the community begging us, right next to the churches and the schools. And we had all of this violent stabbings, assaults, drive-by shootings, murders. Real stuff. But it was the prohibition enforcement that actually created that in the first place. We learned that with alcohol prohibition. You ask any police officer about the history of alcohol prohibition, and they would say, yes, alcohol has its issues, but it was actually the prohibition enforcement that created the vicious gangs, Al Capone and the others, doing their drive-bys with their Tommy guns on each other. That's what it was the prohibition. We ended the prohibition, and most of that violence went away. And that's the same thing we have today. So by in prosecuting this drug war, we actually create that very street violence. We foster it. The cops aren't the ones pulling the triggers and dealing the drugs. No, but they create those conditions for it to exist. And so if you want to get the people off the street corners, if you want to get the drug dealers out of the neighborhoods, then you have to end prohibition. People consider prohibition like this ultimate level of regulation, when actually prohibition is the forced abdication of all regulation. So any substance, they say, and you ask people, well, should marijuana be legal? And they, that's good. And you will say, how about cocaine? Oh, no, cocaine's bad. That's just too dangerous. And actually, the more powerful the substance, the more important it is to allow regulation of it, so it can be it will be safer, because it's going to be used. You can't stop it. We know that. We've done it for 40 years, 100 years. You can't. And so you have to understand that just basic liberty principles, and even constitutionally, alcohol prohibition required a constitution and constitutional amendment. But these other drugs, that to ban them, just on a constitutional level, unconstitutional. So you have to legalize it in order to regulate it. I never responded to a drive-by shooting between two beer distributors. I never heard about a pharmacist paying some kid to go shoot up a competitor's house. But anything like never happened. But the illegal drugs, they would, and it's because of their illegality, not necessarily their general physical harm they may cause to individuals. And even that is exacerbated to the just the nth degree by the prohibition with the current, what we call, we have the opioid epidemic now. I call it the overdose epidemic. It is because, we have people medicating themselves way too much in this country. That is true. I agree. But it's because they don't have any kind of quality control. These people don't know what they're getting from dose to dose. And they have these serious pain issues that they're trying to deal with. You have the pharmaceutical industry getting them hooked and then cutting them off. And so they have nowhere else to go but out on the street. And, they're desperate. And then they get in a bad situation where they get a dosage of medication or heroin that's cut with something, fentanyl or whatever, and it's 100 times or 10 or 100 times more powerful than what they're used to, and it kills them. Or they run out for a little while, and their tolerance goes ways down, and then they go back and take a little bit and what would they consider a normal dose, and that kills them. So that is all prohibition related. And we can even look at other countries that have decriminalized drugs. Portugal's an excellent example. Portugal decriminalized all drugs. Yes, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, all of that. Their overdose death rates are about 10 times lower than most of the states in the United States, even though they've decriminalized. It's not legal, but possession of small amounts is not a criminal offense, and they focus on treatment.
You've brought up so many great points here just in these last several minutes. I mean, the economics of prohibition, like we talked about a little bit, it's the same thing with alcohol. I mean, when you go back and you look at the history of alcohol prohibition, it empowered and created organized crime. It basically bolstered and solidified the mob. And now the drug war has done the same thing with the cartels. Like you were saying, beer distributors don't go shooting at each other because it's a legitimate and regulated business. What would happen if we were to legalize the drugs? It seems, just looking at the economics, is the cartels go out of business because they can no longer compete with the market-based prices, because the reason the drugs are so expensive is because of the illegality and because it's lucrative and it's dangerous to do that, and it forces it into the black market, and that's what causes the prices to go up, and that's why the cartels make money hand over fist. If we end the drug war, the cartels would have to go into another line of work if they wanted to keep making money. Is that your understanding?
That's absolutely correct. And so people have just been really fear mongered, and you got to look at these substances. I do not support drug abuse. I try to avoid even just medications in my life, and I've got a few issues. After being hit by a truck, I've got some lingering medical problems to deal with. I try to avoid medication. I know it has potential negative side effects, but is it evil for me to use it? And people you can tell this fear mongering and reefer madness that we've had for 100 years. If someone says the word disoxin, does that nothing? Have you ever even heard of that? Oh, how about what if I say the word meth? when I say the word meth, you get this visceral reaction. Ooh, that's bad. Well, Digoxin and meth are the same thing. Cocaine's bad, right? Ritalin, the stuff that we give, second graders when they're a little fidgety. Ritalin and cocaine affect the exact same neurotransmitters in your brain. So it's the same substance. Yet one of them is evil and sinful and, will just turn you into this horrible person. And the other one's okay for second graders. So you see, even just in the language of the words and stuff prevents you from even trying to have some type of logical discussion and understanding of it. And that's been intentional, for 100 years. And you talk about cartels and everything. Even if you think drugs should be illegal and criminalized and that the state has the right to do that, understand that very same government has been feeding those drugs into this country for decades. If you look at the CIA, there's a movie out right now called American Made. And it's Tom Cruise is supposed to be Barry Seal. And that's about the 1980s Iran-Contra scandal where, we're good old Oliver North, our American hero, is along with the CIA and the military, are flying drugs, cocaine, plane loads of it straight into America, and targeting what? Minority communities with it. Freeway Ricky Ross in Los Angeles, that's where they sent a lot of it to. And so these very same organizations and governments are the ones pouring it in from the other side to destabilize these communities. And then they send cops like me in there to criminalize it from the other side. And we're just crushing our own country and targeting specific communities first and worst, and have been there, for decades. And well, we have this world's largest prison population by number and percentage in the entire world to show for it. The land of the free, shining city on the hill.
Yeah, and that's, when we hear that story, it's very Machiavellian sounding, right? It's like, oh, we know what we're doing, we can control the situation, and so we're gonna distribute the drugs over here and then use the police to attack the drugs over here, and somehow we're going to expect to remain in control of the situation. Never works out that way. It ends up just destroying communities and cities and families and lives. So it's baffling to think that this is how they operate. But you're right. That's exactly what happens. And you also touched on the whole the pharmaceutical issue, where completely legal pharmaceuticals many people are addicted to, and then they have to turn to much more dangerous street versions of those drugs, and then we throw them in jail for it. So there's also like a crony capitalist element to this, with why is it legal over here but not over here, and there's a hypocrisy element in why would certain elements of the government be dealing in these kind of drugs, and then meanwhile it's illegal for anyone else to do it. It's a whole mess that kind of is a living testimony to the essence of how government operates. So you at some point during your career, you eventually came to the realization, and I think when you and I were emailing, you had mentioned you read some Lawrence Vance, and among others, and you just kind of came to the realization that this isn't right for people. It's not ethical to be doing this. It's not right for the community, for the country, and it's unchristian. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the tipping point and how you ultimately left police work?
Well, yeah. So I was directing traffic, got hit by a truck, I think, and broke my leg, and never did heal back right. And so I had to get out. Because of that, looking back on that now, was it a kind of a positive karmic thing? I think about Jake, the biblical Jacob, where an angel came and wrestled with him and touched his hip, and I kind of feel like maybe that's kind of something that happened to me, where I was touched and injured and kind of to be put on a different track. And so, yeah, when I got out of policing, I was morally conflicted before I got injured. I had gone over into the detective division to try to get away from the drug enforcement because I just knew it just wasn't right for me. I was uncomfortable with it. But even in the detective division where we dealt with real crimes and everything, I saw just really how poor of a job law enforcement did. And it was really where we investigated cases child abuse and sexual assault, and we very likely prosecuted people that were in fact innocent. And that weighed on me, that I had actually put handcuffs on people. And you give somebody like a sexual assault charge when they're actually not guilty of it, even though they, even if the judicial system exonerates them later or whatever, you've really harmed that person. And that weighed on me. I saw how bad we did a job of that, and I felt personally responsible for the harm that I inflicted on people, even though I was well-meaning. And it just that bothered me after I got out of law enforcement, and that rolled around in my head the question of, when is it okay to use force against another person? What policies and procedures and guidelines can you use to justify initiating force against a person? I want to talk about initiating force. You go in there and take someone's freedom from them. You actually put handcuffs on them and lock them in a cage. And you have a gun. You threaten to shoot them if they resist. When is that all right? Well, you have legitimate reasons sometimes. If you have a person that's an actual thief or somebody's trying to kill another person, well, yes, you can use physical force to stop them. But what if they're just, like you say, in using drugs? Now, though they're bad and stuff, yeah, okay, whatever. But is it violent? Well, no. It's consensual adult activity. So you are the one that's initiating that violence and initiating that force. And you say, well, it's constitutional, or your state law says it's okay. Well, I would say that if you align your moral compass with the Constitution and state laws, you're going to very well be a immoral person on a regular basis, and history has shown that to be true. So why do you think that as vicious as the U.S. government has been slavery or Native American genocide, all this constitutional, it was all constitutional at the time, that it was somehow moral and just? And the answer is no. And so you think today that it's different, that there's no law there that's legal yet immoral? And that's just the height of hubris to think that you live in a time like that. Again, when we're talking about the world's largest, most powerful government that has the world's largest prison population, 2.3 million people currently in prison in the United States, 5 million under additional correctional control. I mean, there's no other country in the world that has that level. We're about 7 or 8 times more people incarcerated than what is in Western European countries. And that tells you right there.
Even more than China and other places, right? I mean, it's like you said, it is the world's largest. It's really just astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at China and you take the most extreme political prisoner incarceration rates that are estimated out there for them, we're still about 4 times higher than that. Even North Korea, even the estimates for North Korea, their incarceration rate is slightly higher than the United States. It's less than the state of Louisiana's. So, you compare Louisiana and North Korea, Louisiana's got them beat hands down. And we're supposed to be the freest country in the world. And again, I go to the individual police officer. You are the one when you enforce an unjust law, you are the one bringing the harm of that law into existence. And it's your actions. Any law that's immoral, you perform that action and you bring that resultant harm into physical manifestation. When you put the handcuffs on a person for a law that does not have a moral justification, you become an immoral person. And this is also what I felt, and I think what a lot of officers feel, is you suffer moral injury to yourself, your moral fiber, your conscience. You harm yourself when you act unjustly towards another person, and your badge or any government laws or even the Supreme Court cannot shield you from that fundamental moral principle of human interaction.
Now, what would you say? I know some people are going to be thinking, well, maybe there's some cops out there who maybe are thinking, well, I don't agree with the drug laws, and maybe they try to not enforce the drug laws, even though their job requires them to. Is that practical? I mean, does that work? Are there how many cops out there are thinking that way? Is it possible at all to be a cop and not fall into these moments where you have to enforce these statist policies against nonviolent activity?
Well, as a police officer, just being a police officer kind of self-selects for people that do agree that these laws are just, and whatever logic they use to come to get to that conclusion. So people that come to the conclusion, hey, you know what, this stuff really is immoral, no matter what the laws say, they get out of law enforcement, or they never get in it in the first place. So you have this confirmation bias, within law enforcement and all. And you'll see a lot of officers, they're uncomfortable with it, one way or another. But, marijuana is a big one. All of them will say, that marijuana shouldn't be legalized, except for a few that they get paid to go testify in front of Senate committees. Otherwise, but all the others, it needs to be legal. And just so people know, that would be a big difference. Marijuana, illegal drug use, people who use an illegal drug, 66% or 65% of people who report using illegal drugs, just marijuana alone. So if you legalize marijuana, you would eliminate 2/3 of our quote unquote illegal drug users right there in the spot. And we've seen that even in, you see positive benefits of that in Colorado. Notice that prescription drug use has gone down considerably in the state of Colorado once marijuana became legal. And that makes you wonder, maybe there are some interior motives for keeping it illegal. But yeah, as far as police officers, you try to, and that's what I did. You try to kind of remove yourself from things that you kind of feel are maybe immoral, and try to get into those lines that are more consistent with your morality. And that's what I try to do. Is that possible and be a police officer? That's a good question. And that's what people need to, to ask themselves. Can you do that? Well, can you serve two masters? And that's kind of where I lead. And the answer is no, you can't. Now, I know that hurts a lot of people's feelings, and because, America's a Christian nation, and Romans 13 and all that says, that by enforcing, nation's laws, you're enforcing God's will, or somehow, and that might not be quite right. If you are mistaken, and I think of there's Shakespeare's King Henry V. King Henry, he's fixing to have a battle. He disguises himself as a common soldier and talks to his men before the battle, and he's talking, well, how do the men feel about going and attacking other men on the king's behalf? And one of the men says, well, if his cause be wrong, our loyalty to the king will take the sin out of it. And I think police officers today make that same mistake, that somehow, even if they cause unjust harm to others, as long their obedience to the state and just that they're following orders will somehow remove the sin from their actions. And you may have an account.
It's kind of like the Richard Nixon line, right? It's when the president does it, it's not illegal. If the king commands it, it's not a sin. But that's sure not in the Bible.
No, and see, if you face that and say, wow, well, I was following, everything was legal and it was what I was taught. And well, the Supreme Court justices say it's good and that's everything. America's awesome, so it must be all right. That's everything I've been taught since third grade. And people are continually and completely indoctrinated with the belief that government enforcers are the embodiment of righteousness. But when they're exposed to evidence counter to this, it's a big blow to your ego. And people have so much of their own identity, and police officers especially, their own identity wrapped up in this core belief. And it's extremely unpleasant to realize you wasted and misplaced so much of your own emotional capital, particularly when you have to face just how much damage you have inflicted on other people. And to face that and to deal with it requires true reflection. You have to admit culpability and liability, which police departments don't like to do. It's also very humiliating, and you have to humble yourself, and you've got to stop doing what you're doing. You have to change your ways. And by changing your ways, that's a further admission of your error. In courses of action like that, you can only speak about them on church on Sunday, but really only in the most abstract and insincere manners. Actually doing that for yourself the other 6 days of the week when you're on your job, especially when you're under orders to do so, it's almost impossible. And people they double down with the logic. And so they go, well, it's not the law that's failed. It's not the government who's failed. It's that it was our lack of faith in the system that has caused it to fail. And you see police officers do that too, just straight up with the drug war. They'll say, wow, it's not working. We need to try harder and get tougher. And we must, sacrifice more of our conscience. We've got to really do some hard things here. And the injustice and the suffering only perpetuates. And you see police officers and our military men, why do they have such high rates of PSD? I think a lot of that is a moral injury. That's harm that they've caused to other people, enforcing unjust laws and commands. And again, you suffer those moral consequences to your own moral fiber, your psyche, whatever you want to call it. And the first thing you have to do to deal with that is admit that you were wrong and you caused harm. To do that would be to indict the system that you had a ton of faith in, and people don't want to do that.
Well, we touched on this a little bit, or you did earlier, and now we're kind of back to it again. When we're looking at people who are in police work or also the military, which you just mentioned, amongst libertarians, you kind of have a couple of different groups. Some people, it seems like all they ever want to do is just bash and dehumanize police officers. Number one, that's not a Christian attitude. The Christian attitude, even if somebody's doing something wrong, is to love your enemies and seek to help them to repent of what they're doing, which is what you're talking about. So, as You kind of mentioned at the outset that most police, at least in your experience, are trying to do what they think is right. They're trying to do well. Now, sure, there's probably a lot of double standard in that and hypocrisy, but nevertheless, they're not going out to work every day thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to stick it to some citizens." They're going out there thinking that what they're doing is ultimately good. So how can we actually reach them in a constructive and loving way? I mean, because what some of these libertarians do, just bashing cops, I don't think is helpful or Christian to do it that way. But how can we reach them in a way that shows them, hey, this really is wrong, and you need to stop doing this?
That's really hard to do. It was difficult for me. Again, it took me several years of just kind of reflection. And there's very few people that really even talk about it and speak about that in those type of ways. So you just don't even hear that there is some type of discontinuity between what is right and what is legal. With police officers, yes. If they were just bad guys and they were malicious, that would be easy to fix. The fact they're well-meaning, well-intended, and as far as you say the rules are, which cover a lot of abuse, they're just generally following policy, and so that's a hard kind of cognitive dissonance for a police officer to understand. And that's why I'm speaking out so much, is because I'm talking to myself of a cop from 10 years ago. Say, man, wake up. You know, you're harming yourself. Not only are you not helping and you're actually destabilizing your community, but you're spiritually and morally harming your own self. And so you've got to start to look at this beyond just following orders, and understand you are endowed with free will, and we all are, every individual officer, and with that free will comes a responsibility to choose right from wrong, and see this is where I get into the by even serving as an enforcer or armed government agent, just in kind of a libertarian principle of government itself being illegitimate is, and how that is inconsistent with Christianity, is the government claims that it can change right from wrong. That's what it does with a piece of paper or just popular opinion, that it can say, all right, if you did this just under not even a Christian principle, but just a basic human decency of when you can use violence or force against another person would be wrong. To go into a stranger's home because they have a plant that you don't like and go and take it from them, shoot them if they resist, it's morally wrong. But see, the government claims that it can change that and transmute that wrong into a right. And so that's that's violating God's will. And that is a huge deception when people buy that. And so the government's very own existence is antithetical to basic godly principles of right and wrong. And to say, oh, like we can change that? No, you can't. And that's what God's will is? Is that what not part of what, truth is? Now, do we have different understandings and ideas? Well, I think it means this. Well, sure, we do. But no more than your different ideas on gravity doesn't change gravity. And it's the same way with these rights and wrongs. And no way there's no government edict or declaration or even a constitution can change the laws of gravity. In the same way with human interaction. That's just a basic principle that we don't teach anyone. And police officers, they have a higher duty than even just an average person. And even you do legitimate work and dispute resolution and protecting other people. Yes, that's all morally just and correct and righteous and praiseworthy. Yes, it is. But you have to really use that free will and that conscience that you've been endowed with by your Creator to determine for yourself, because you're the one that's going to bear that culpability of those actions, not some government, not some piece of paper. You're the one that's going to bear those and have an ultimate accounting. And so we need to speak to people and say, hey, this has really been distorted, and you're going to pay a price for this.
So another thing that I want to ask about is that, right now on kind of an international scale, sort of what we're seeing as far as the drug war is this craziness in the Philippines, where the president there has just launched an all-out militaristic police state war on drugs, where the cops are like just executing people on the streets extrajudicially, and it's total pandemonium. And yet, amazingly, Trump has said things like, "Yeah, they're doing great things with the drug problem in the Philippines." I mean, I don't want what's happening in the Philippines to come to the United States. Is that the direction we're headed, or do you think that people are kind of waking up? I mean, it seems like at least marijuana is being legalized in a lot of places now, first medically, then recreationally. Seems like maybe we're moving in the right direction, but I don't know. That could turn off on a whole other path. I mean, I have no idea how this is going to play out. What do you think?
Well, what you've seen this drug war ebb and flow for a couple hundred years. What you're seeing in the Philippines, our Harrison Narcotics Act in 1914, 100 years ago, was really part of that was specifically for the Philippines, which was, a newly conquered territory. Remember when we liberated the Philippines, fought for their freedom from Spain, and of course we then killed, 500,000 Filipinos in part of their pacification program, in the late 1800s. And so we did our own kind of program that President Duarte is doing right now. We did that 100 years ago in the Philippines, and killed lots of Filipinos to protect them from evil Chinese opium. And of course, if you even just use the Wikipedia version Google the Opium Wars in the East India Trading Company. And so from the 1700s on, that is what governments, so Western governments, at first, is Britain, and then it's kind of moved over to us now. As what did they do in the Opium Wars? Well, they fought to keep it illegal in China, yet the British grew tons of it in India and then imported it in. So they would keep it illegal, and that would help protect their market. And then they would say, no, but you got to allow us to sell it in India and have our exclusive trading. And so they were doing that then. And they do the same thing with the Philippines. So what you have going on today is just a continuation of those wars. And we did that, in Laos and Vietnam in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And in the 70s and 80s, that's exactly what we were doing and continue to do this day in Colombia, and Nicaragua, and El Salvador, and Panama, and Mexico, with our drug war down there that's killing thousands of people. It's all the same thing. So you just kind of ebbs and flows with the viciousness of it. So Duarte, he's killing people, and he has his gangs, which are law enforcement. Are they killing drug dealers? Maybe some, but it's more just kind of consolidation of who's going to be to do the dealing, who controls the streets. Even I think Duarte's own son is has now been shown that he's a $1 million drug dealer. So it's the same game. It's the same game. And whether a dictator like Duarte does it, or whether our own government, super awesome Ronald Reagan, whether he does it or it continues today. Wow, what are we doing in Afghanistan, occupying that country for the past 16 years, while it provides 93% of the world's heroin?
Another thing that has, of course, been in the media a lot. And this has been a problem for decades, but it's really starting to come to fruition now. Has to do with things like racial disparities in the policing and the court system. It's overwhelmingly, minorities who tend to be on the receiving end of these laws. So, in your insight, two questions. Number one, is it really a true disparity there, or is it that minority populations tend to be higher users of drugs, or is it really a systemic problem in the system? And then number two, what impact does this have on families and communities when these people they go to jail, they get a record, then they get out, and it's hard for them to get a job because many people, they just don't want to employ a felon. And so then they end up turning back to crime, or it's like a vicious cycle, it seems. So what's your insight on that?
Well, two things going on. First of all, just as individual police officers, and this is in my department, and I'm sure it's the same way in most across America, not racist. I know it looks like that, and you hear about it all the time, but that's why police officers get so upset, and really they shut down with listening to the community when you hear, oh, that's racist this and racist that, and they're not. They try really hard not to be. Had very good black leadership in my department, and they wouldn't stand for any of that. Yet we had the same disparities with our arrest rates. Marijuana is a big one. Black and white use marijuana at the same rate, yet we arrested blacks 3 or 4 times more for it. So why is that? And so while at the same time, very little racism in police departments today, drug enforcement has always been racially implied. That was an intentional act. That's what they used it. They talk about evil Chinese and these dope smoking jazz players in the 1930s, and then that's what the drug wars, that when they really started in 1972. That was kind of the end of Jim Crow and the civil rights era. And so they used the drug laws. They said, no, we're going to make them apply to everyone, but we're going to really target minority communities and use it as a tool of oppression against them. And so we demonize the minority communities like they're, if you remember the hate stories, the drug crazed Negroes and all this other stuff, it's yellow journalism. And we continued that. So it was racist from its inception. And when you criminalize, you take a community and you fence them in kind of economically and socially. It's it's not a hard fence. People can move in and out a little bit, but you redline them. They're limited with their transportation and jobs. They're kind of stuck. And then you turn law enforcement loose on them, and they become an integral part. You do this for generations of this broken windows, proactive drug war policing. And what you do is you over police and underserve them, and you criminalize them at a much higher degree. And you do that to any community, especially one that was already less stable than the rest of the country. And I'll show you a community that can't pull themselves up from their bootstraps. Obviously, they have more crime now because you just criminalized them and destabilized them for generations. So that's why law enforcement's like, well, we just go where the crime is. Well, you, for decades, have been part of that problem. And now it just kind of self-perpetuates. But we still have the mass incarceration. And so it's never going to stop until we have a massive and radical reduction in our criminalization. And that will take a very long time. And policing is only a part of it. There's lots of other economic and social issues as well.
So as we kind of wrap this up here, Raeford, why don't you, what would your message be, I guess, to anyone who's listening who, either you spoke a lot to people who may be police, but for our listeners, most of whom are probably not going to be police, but who may know some police officers or others who are pro-drug war, what would kind of be your elevator pitch, strongest arguments from an ex-cop who changed course on this issue for why the drug war is unethical and ineffective and destructive to this country?
Again, anyone, they can look at it from any different issue. If you are a student of the Constitution, it's obviously unconstitutional. If you actually want to help people and reduce harm, then you should be against drug prohibition enforcement. If you would like to live in a free country that doesn't have the world's highest prison incarceration rate, you must be against the drug war. If you support fundamental principles of liberty, you should be against the drug war. If you don't want evil drugs getting in the hands of kids, then you need to be against the drug war because it actually sucks kids in even more than if they were legalized. So from wherever you come from it, the logical answer is to end our violent government prohibition enforcement. Your community deserves better.
Yeah, and then we'd also certainly add the Christian element, which, for our audience, would probably be one of the most compelling things, is just that you look at the New Testament, you look at the example of Christ and the apostles and the non-aggression principle and how that applies to Christian ethics. And yeah, we can look at the drug problem and say, of course it's an actual problem. People shouldn't go around, using cocaine or shooting up heroin. It's probably a bad thing to do, but those people have a medical issue and they need help. It doesn't mean what they're doing is good, but Christian ethics requires us to seek what's best for them and to help them and to seek their restoration, not to destroy them.
Correct. And I would say anyone that uses drugs, and here's the thing, there's lots of people, even marijuana has medical benefits. We have children with seizures that actually benefit from this stuff, and I've seen them. And I've seen police officers just sit there and say, "Well, too bad for you. You should get the law changed. As long as the law is there, your child's going to suffer." That's just inhumane. Now you have people that, I like to get high and do coke. Well, even them, that may be their sin. That is true. But the moment you resort to violence or the threat of violence to interfere with them, then that becomes your sin. Now, can you socially ostracize them? Of course. If they threaten to steal from you, then you can defend yourself. If these people forcefully try to sell this stuff to little children, you can arrest them. If they are intoxicated and driving down the road and they are an imminent danger to other people, stop them. Yes. But to go into people's homes and raid them, to use civil asset forfeiture, just because maybe they maybe kind of were using drugs or something. That is, totally unchristian. If people come into your church and try to sell evil drugs to your parishioners, you are welcome to drive them out with a whip. But to invade that other stranger's home and do that and drive them out with a whip, that's different. And we can see the unchristian principles. And one more thing, can we talk about Romans 13 for just a moment, if we could?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And you look at Romans 13, and it says, well, whatever the government does, that's God's will, and you should obey that. And I know I've heard y'all talk about it, and I agree with the same way. What it means is, you shouldn't violently try to, attack the government. And I'm okay with that. So as a general citizen, if it's don't do drugs, it's illegal. Or as a Christian, should you follow that law? Yeah, sure. But now, you turn around and enforce that law, and when you use unchristian principles of force to enforce that law, then that is wrong. So that Romans 13 does not justify being an agent of that wrong, and that somehow that will exonerate you from any sin. That makes no sense. You can go and be the most vicious murderer as long as you have a uniform on and you get orders to do it, and that's okay. And that's God, that makes no sense, guys. So, should you, as a citizen, you're not required. There's no Christian duty to revolt against the government. No, there's no Christian duty to do that. But it definitely does not justify being an agent of that unjust oppression.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. I mean, that's kind of my own understanding on the text, is that Romans 12 is an apostolic instruction of Paul to the church on how they are to behave. Romans 13 is a practical instruction to the church on how they are to live under the empire and not revolt against the empire. Don't become a terrorist. Don't become a revolutionary. But that doesn't mean that what the government is doing is good. It just means that it's under God's providence, and he will ultimately turn it to his purposes. Raeford, this has been just a truly fascinating interview, and where can our listeners find out more information on your work? I mean, where can they find you on social media? Do you have a website? Do you plan on maybe writing a book or something one day? I think that would be very interesting.
I'm just still kind of learning and everything and moving along. I'm on Twitter, so you can find me at Raeford D. I've written a little bit. I have a blog, Blue Enmity, and I also have a few articles posted at Libertarian Institute, and they do a good job up there.
Yeah, that's Scott Horton and them, right?
Scott Horton, yeah, and he's he's a great advocate for liberty. So you can find me there. If everybody wants to contact me, you'll find me on Twitter.
All right, so that concludes this episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast. If you'd like to reach us, you can find us on Twitter at LCI Official, or you can contact us through our web form at libertarianchristians.com. You can also support us at libertarianchristians.com/donate. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Libertarian Christian Podcast is a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute, a registered 501c3 nonprofit. The audio engineers were Doug Stewart and Jason Rink, and voiceovers were by Matthew Bellis and Caitlin Horn. If you'd like to find out more about the LCI, please visit us on the web at www.libertarianchristians.com.